Welcome to this edition of Labor Vision. I'm Bob Delaney, Executive Director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research. Labor Vision, a production of the Institute, focuses on topics of importance to working Rhode Islanders. We hope you enjoy this edition.
Well, my name's Mary Lee Partington, and it is such an honor and a privilege to be with you here this morning for this commemoration of what I often refer to as the 1934 Massacre. It's a powerful moment in the history of labor, and it's a powerful moment in the history of Rhode Island. And it's a powerful moment for us to be able to reflect on it in music. So that's why I'm here with you this morning as part of Kevin Doyle's Roscommon Souls, but also a duo known as Partington and Sweeney. So here's to folk music and to history. This song is one that has its roots in 1907 in England, in London. It was written by Ada S. Habershon, but yet you know it by a far different version in the 1940s by a crew called the Carter Family. But I'm guessing you know this chorus well, because this circle will always remain unbroken. You ready to sing a little bit with me?
Yeah, sure.
Will the circle be unbroken by and by, by and by? There's a better home awaiting in the sky, in the sky. There are loved ones in the glory whose dear forms you often miss. When you close your earthly story, will you join them in their blues? Ready? Will the circle be unbroken by and by, by and by? There's a better home awaiting in the sky, in the sky. Remember songs of heaven which you sang with childish voice. You love those hymns they taught you, for our songs of earth your choice. Will the circle be unbroken by and by, by and by? There's a better home awaiting in the sky, in the sky, in the sky, in the sky. Oh, thank you. Thank you kindly. Usually I'm surrounded by an entire crew of musicians, but in the last year and a half, I just don't know what became of them. I was first asked to come and join this ceremony a number of years ago, several years ago, and I want to say a very big thank you to a lifelong friend in the music and the history, Scott Malloy. Thank you for sharing this incredible moment with me through these years. And it occurred to me 3 or 4 years ago that the story behind Saylesville is so powerful and so dramatic that it really fits into the ballad tradition. And so I made a song for the Rhode Island Labor History Society specifically for this commemoration. And it's called the 1934 Saylesville Massacre. And it has a chorus, if you pick it up along the way, which is by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, which is here. By the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, I lay my body down. The Moshassuck is an Algonquin word for the marshy meadow, and in singing this song, I'd really like to honor the place of the Algonquin people, the Eastern Woodlands people, in the ceremony that we're having today, because they, along with those who suffered during 1934, are the ones who first lay their bodies down. So here's how the chorus goes. Let's see, let's bring that down a little bit. By the marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, I lay my body down. So that's how the chorus goes. Let's try that one more time. By the brook, I'll make that a little lower. As if I want anyone to sing with me, right? By the middle of the marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle, marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, I lay my body down. If I do it one more time, will you feel more comfortable? By the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, I lay my body down. In 1934, the National Guard was at the mill ford. Governor Green sent them and more to lay my body down. By the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, I lay my body down. If the deputy sheriffs had their way, the workers and the strikers would be forced to stay at the Saylesville mill where they worked for pay, then lay their bodies down. By the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, I lay my body down. On a long-remembered September day, the strikers ran for cover where their families lay. Beneath the stones that marked the way, their bodies were shot down. By the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, I lay my body down. Oh, the marshy meadow is a holy land, named Moshassuck by a woodlands band of the native people who took a stand, then laid their bodies down. By the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, I lay my body down. To all who labor and earn their keep, Moshassuck is not a call to leave. The strikers shut the mill, but the union did keep, for we lay our bodies down. By the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, by the brook in body down. One more time, nice and loud. By the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, by the brook in the middle of the marshy meadow, I lay my body down.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Labor Day. So my name is Jim Parisi. I'm a field rep with the Rhode Island Federation of Teachers and Health Professionals, and I'm the president of the Rhode Island Labor History Society, here to welcome you this morning. For those of you who were at our annual banquet a couple of weeks ago, if you'd indulge me, I'd like to start my remarks today the way I started my remarks a couple of weeks ago, and that's taking a moment to reflect on the passing of a recent great labor leader, Richard Trumka. Richard Trumka was born outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He was a son of a miner. He became a lawyer. He was a miner himself, and then he went to work for the United Mine Workers. He became president of the United Mine Workers in 1982 and did that for a number of years until he was elected the Secretary-Treasurer of the AFL-CIO in in 09. And then he became president and he was president until his untimely death a month ago on August 5th of this year. I remember Richard Trumka's leadership well. Well-regarded, a great sense of the importance of community when you're a labor leader. He was most noted to me when he led the United Mine Workers on a 9-month strike against Pittston Coal in 1989. 9-month strike. It's just hard to imagine what the workers had to go through to stay together, stand in solidarity, and be victorious. But he had a great sense of organizing not only his members, but the retirees, the community at large, all of whom had a stake in the pay and the benefits and the retirement benefits of those miners and their families. And that's why he was ultimately successful in that strike. Richard died a month ago, and if you'll join me in a moment of silence and reflection of the life of Richard Trumka, former AFL-CIO president. Thank you. So the Rhode Island Labor History Society has been coming to this place for 11 years now for our annual Labor Day address, and we're looking forward to hearing a different kind of talk on a different kind of topic from Autumn in a couple of minutes. We come here because this was the site of a major labor struggle back during the Depression. It was in 1934 where there was a national textile strike of which Rhode Island factories joined in, not at the beginning, but later on. And this was a scene of major civil unrest, I'll call it, right here on the ground that we stand on, when strikers and rioters associated with the work stoppage at the Saylesville mill right that way, and the mill owners mounted guns on the roof of the factory to suppress the workers who were keeping the strike going, and actually shot at the strikers into this cemetery. You'll note a couple of bullet holes in that tombstone right to my right if you want to get a good piece of visible Rhode Island labor history. And we come here because it's important to remember the struggles of the past, and that's why the Labor History Society exists, is to keep events like this going, to remind all of us of labor's history. But labor history isn't just about strikes during the Depression era. Labor history predates the Depression, postdates the Depression, and it's something the Labor History Society takes to heart. This past year, when we were constrained with holding in-person events, we organized an online speaker series that Miriam Ruman organized from us. Miriam's a professor at URI, and it included topics such as the business of slavery in Rhode Island and female networks of slavery, how poor women in the early 19th century made a living. We talked about Saylesville, of course, but we also talked about organizing police unions in Maryland in the 80s. So there's a broad span of labor history, and the Depression era is really interesting because it involved lots of pitched battles and really heroic strikes. But there's a lot of working class history that is outside of unions that we're always mindful of as a labor history society, and that's why we exist. We exist to keep our collective history alive. And we're very proud here in Rhode Island to be the last labor history standing in New England. Once there was labor history societies in every New England state, and we're the last one left, and we're going to stick around for a long time to keep things going. So in a nutshell, what we do is we host programs like this. We come here every year. We have an annual awards banquet where we honor labor leaders and community leaders. We did that a couple of weeks ago when we honored Jeanette Woolley of the NEA Rhode Island, Paul Valletta of the State Association of Firefighters. We honored Jack Callasy of UNAP and Mike Daly of IBEW. We do online speaker series. We give students who do labor-oriented projects on History Day $100 checks to do a labor-oriented topic in order to promote not just us adults, but young people to learn about their history and learn about labor history. We gave a contribution to the Museum of Work and Culture this year, as we do every year, so they could be open free of charge, and co-sponsored a screening of a movie they're airing right now called Slatersville about the Mill Village up in North Smithfield. We held book events, and we do a lot of different programs to keep our history alive, and we're very proud to do that. Should you want to join us, there are membership brochures on the table over there, so when you grab a coffee and a donut, grab a membership brochure as well. I'd like to take a moment to thank some of the elected officials who've joined us today, a couple of statewide officers. Peter Nerona, our Attorney General, joined us today. Thank you, Peter. And our General Treasurer, Seth Magaziner. Seth, thanks for coming to our event again this year. Former Senator McKinney is here from the city of Warwick. And we have a good representation of Warwick elected officials here. Thank you for coming. Representative Vella Wilkinson and Representative Bennett is in the area. And then Representative Greg Amore, NEA member from East Providence, has joined us. And God forbid I forgot someone, so I'd apologize for that. Before we bring Autumn up for her remarks, and then we're going to have a couple of closing songs from Mary Lee again, I'd like to call on George Nee to take a moment to come up here, because this is an important event for an organization that has a couple of important founders. You know, Mary Lee already mentioned Scott Malloy, but there's someone else we'd like to call to mind today. And George Nee, president of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO.
Thanks, Jimmy. I know it's hard for some of us to believe this, but 15 years ago, we lost a great one, a great person, and a great leader in the labor movement, Chuck Schwartz. And Chuck was a special person. Let me just ask, raise your hand if you knew Chuck. Okay, well, you know, that's good, but there's a lot of people that didn't raise their hand, so I think it's important for his legacy to continue. I walked around, talked to a few people, and asked them before I gave my remarks if they could give me one word that came to mind when they thought of Chuck. And I got dedicated, faithful, committed, and one very interesting, ever present. Now, if you knew Chuck, he was always ever present at everything, and he would be here today, and probably is here today in a different format, with a camera on his shoulder and a tripod on the other one, and carrying all this stuff, and he'd be filming this, and God knows how it ever got done, but it got onto Labor Vision, and he is the father of Labor Vision, which still exists today. and I believe is one of the only labor-oriented television shows that has been going on now for about 40 years. So that's a credit to Chuck. I want to give a special recognition to Ed McElroy, who was the president of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO at the time, and there was an opening to be the director, executive director of the Institute for Labor Studies and Research, which Eddie had founded when he became the president of the AFL-CIO. And again, for some of the people who didn't know Chuck, from the mainstream labor movement, Chuck was not all that popular a guy. Chuck may have been considered by some as Brother Malloy and Brother Clinker and a few other people who were seen as a little too radical at the time, including myself. But I want to give special credit to Eddie, because Eddie saw something when that opening occurred of Chuck. And when he made that decision to hire Chuck as the executive director, he literally changed labor education in Rhode Island and took a chance with someone who was a little bit out of the mainstream, and a well thought out chance. And Chuck won over everybody as time went on. And so that legacy of the Institute, which today continues and has benefited thousands of people, particularly in ESL, GED, and literacy programs to improve their lives. And every year when we have the Institute dinner and those hundreds of people show up on the stage who went through the programs, I think, wow, Chuck is still here. He's doing a great job. I'm going to end with one little thing about Chuck that you should know. If you did know him, you know this. And if you don't, you should. Chuck was a nonviolent person. However, he had an exception. When there was a strike on, Chuck turned into a fierce warrior. A nonviolent fierce warrior, except with one exception. He really didn't think that people who crossed a picket line, in the old vernacular, the scabs, he really didn't think that they should be able to drive their cars home. And so as a result of this, oftentimes, and I was involved with several of these strikes, Chuck would go off on a little mission, and at the end of the day, one of the police officers might come and see me and say, hey, are you aware that so many cars in this area that were parked over there, all their tires got flat? I said, you know, there's some very poor drivers among those scabs, and they drive over nails and they drive over glass. And I can't help it, but, you know, maybe they shouldn't come to work here. But so Chuck, you know, he had that side to him, and you know him. He, when that people's rights were at stake, Chuck was there. Now I'm going to see if we could pull this off. 15 years ago, there was a ceremony for Chuck at the Teamsters Hall to commemorate his life, and I was asked to speak at that, and I gave some lyrics from a particular song that I thought epitomized Chuck. And because it's still early in the speaking program, I decided it's better not to sing them. And so we're going to try to see, with my assistance from Pat Crowley, our Secretary-Treasurer, if we can put one more song into the program today.
We'll see if we can pull this off.
We'll see if we can pull this off. If not, I got a few lyrics.
No, it's not quite loud enough.
It's not going to work.
No. Can you hear it?
You got it.
All right, we got it.
You got to pull it down.
You know I just want to shake her, because people like you help people like me go on, go on. People like you help people like me go on, go on. Old Nadler with a scar for every town, thought you were no better than the rest. You wore your colors every way but down. All you ever gave is what you count. I hope that when my time is almost gone, they'll say that people like me helped people like you. Go on, go on, because people like you help people like me. Go on, go on, go on.
And Chuck was that kind of person. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Autumn Guillotte is a organizer with the Rhode Island AFL-CIO, but she's also a student of labor, a labor scholar, a world traveler, and she's done some original research that on a topic that I know nothing about. So I'm looking forward to learning something new and different here in Moshassuck Cemetery this morning. Autumn, the podium is yours.
So hi and happy Labor Day. I'm really happy to be here, especially after this year of uncertainty and isolation. The Labor History Society really is like home to me. I was one of those kids that got that $100 check. Actually year after, because I was like, oh, I can get paid to do homework. So then I became a labor historian. So I'm very happy to be here. This year has been complicated. It's been a year of promoting mask mandates and helping with vaccination rollouts, and where necessary, picketing for safer working conditions. Safety and empowerment in the workforce are not new concepts for us. In fact, that's why we're here, right? Almost 100 years ago, mill workers were fighting for these basic ideals, safety and empowerment. As members of the labor movement, we pay honor to those who came before us, those who fought and protested for something better, who even gave their lives for that promise of a safer and more empowered future. Today, I want to honor workers who were not able to make such public demonstrations, the women and girls from the Providence House of the Good Shepherd. Before Me Too, before Roe v. Wade, before the sexual revolution, the pill, Planned Parenthood, even before New England's first birth control clinic, which was only for married women, established in Providence in 1931, the mere thought of breaking one of society's many social rules put women in Rhode Island and in the world at the risk of lifelong institutionalization. The Sisters of the Good Shepherd were one of the only options for Catholic parents whose daughters were now unwed mothers, victims of sexual assault, too flirtatious, or simply difficult. These women did our laundry and mended our clothes for over 50 years, but many native Rhode Islanders wouldn't know who they are. At the time, they were called penitents, wayward girls and fallen women. They were unpaid, confined to an institution, and given little chance to leave. They were purposefully kept out of sight so that family members and the broader community didn't have to face these workers' perceived immorality. Some would spend a lifetime in the institution, their only education being the industrial laundry with which they worked. Others would only be there for a few years, but would conceal that fact for the rest of their lives for the shame that would follow them. The Providence House of the Good Shepherd was run by the Sisters of the Good Shepherd at the invitation of our first bishop, Matthew Harkins. It was for women who had become a bane to themselves and to society by a life of sin. The house was located at 189 Eaton Street in Providence. The main building of the property now serves as the President's House for the Providence College campus. The house first opened its doors on June 1st, 1905. Its purpose, according to the original charter granted by the General Assembly, was to maintain a refuge and home for unfortunate women and for educating and reforming children, girls, exposed to dangerous influences as regards morality. The house was run by the sisters until its closure in 1955, and at one point it held over 200 inmates. They were called inmates. Many were referred by the Rhode Island courts to serve their probation with the sisters, and in those cases the state paid $2 a week per inmate, and they were often kept much longer than their actual probation sentence. These inmates worked a mandatory 60 hours a week for no pay in an industrial laundry which expanded 3 times during its operation from 1905 to 1955. For approximately 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, every woman and girl committed to the Providence House adhered to a strict silence, save for their morning prayers, and they worked until their evening meal. They were divided into many different categories based on age, degree of sinfulness, and ultimately those who were voluntarily and involuntarily committed. The inmates were unofficially dubbed fallen or wayward, but officially referred to the church as penitents and Magdalens. The Providence House of the Good Shepherd was a Magdalen laundry. Magdalen laundries existed all over the world, but are still relatively unknown in the United States. They're infamous in Ireland, where their last laundry didn't close until 2001. Ireland's history with these institutions became global news when in 1993, the bodies of 155 women were found in a mass grave in Dublin on property previously owned by the Sisters of the Good Shepherd. This incident sparked an international outcry for the victims of the laundries and the living survivors seeking justice. Since then, similar unmarked mass graves in unconsecrated ground have been found all over Ireland and in other parts of the world such as Canada and Australia. These institutions affected generations, especially for the unwed mothers, who were institutionalized to hide their shame. The unwed mothers would work until they gave birth, and then after they gave birth, their children were taken away from them, without any knowledge of where they ended up. Some of these children were placed in industrial schools, where they would be transferred to laundries when they were old enough, spending an entire lifetime from infancy to adulthood in an institution simply because of the immoral circumstances of their birth. Many more of these orphans were sold to orphanages and adopted overseas, especially sent to the United States. While Magdalen laundries have been most commonly associated with Ireland, there were laundries in the U.S. which predated even those. By 1905, there were nearly 50 Houses of the Good Shepherd in the States. Bishop Harkins in Providence often collaborated with Good Shepherd convents in neighboring dioceses in Boston, New York, and Connecticut. When Harkins first expressed interest to the sisters in Boston, which had established their convent in 1867, the sister Mary of St. Gertrude reached out to the Provincial House in New York on his behalf. When plans were final, she was in New York and sent Harkins a clipping from a Connecticut paper which boasted the exemplary work done in Hartford. All of this is to say that from the start there was communication between different states and dioceses for the establishment of the Providence House. In fact, the bill to incorporate the Providence House was modeled after the Connecticut law. In the collection of letters between Harkins and the diocese attorney, John D. Doran, they reference the best practice of other states for the formation of Providence House with the aim of paying as little tax as possible and receiving as much state payment as allowed. And it became clear that the house would only become feasible, if not profitable, if they made sure it was not taxed at all and they received as much state payments for the care of the inmates as possible. Houses of the Good Shepherd were recognized in an unofficial branch of the criminal justice system in the United States. It's key that we consider them as private businesses and less so as religious or benevolent institutions. In some way, shape, or form, the United States has always relied on private partners for the confinement of society's less desirables. Protestant, Catholic, or secular, the model is the same: work and confinement in the name of reform. When the Good Shepherd sisters arrived in North America, they brought with them a perfected business model, which they sold to individual dioceses, towns, and states. The most essential part of their operation was the collaboration between Good Shepherd sister convents from across the country. The houses behaved like a franchise. Whatever experience was had in one house was likely replicated in another. Even before the Providence House opened, Bishop Harkins had seen the service that the Good Shepherd sisters could provide and relied on them. In 1900, he received a letter from the Mother Superioress in Boston. In this letter, she responded to his appeal to house a young parishioner, Catherine Lane. Sister Mary of the Assumption offered to keep the poor child at the Boston House of the Good Shepherd, where they were just beginning a new class for young penitents, entirely separated from those poor old creatures grown old in sin. There's no indication in this letter or any others of the willingness or consent of Catherine Lane, her parents, or any of the wards like her. Children were essential to the Magdalene model. They made up the preservative class or intermediates. The state paid for adult female probationers, but they paid even more for the care of its dependent children. Key to any house trying to establish itself was to create as many classes as possible. Separating the women and girls served many purposes. For the Good Shepherd sisters, it's a hallmark of any Magdalene laundry. The enforced silence and segregation prevented inmates from forming friendships or creating any social networks beyond the religious order which governed their lives. However, the sisters of the time would claim that it was to prevent the moral corruption of the preservatives by the penitents. The intermediate and preservative classes targeted adolescent and teenage girls. Bishop Harkins wrote that they were young girls who had not yet brought disaster upon themselves, but were inclined to go astray. They offered a new source of income, especially if they had been state referred. In the United States, some houses even received money from the Community Chest, which is now United Way, as charity providers. In the general laws, charitable institutions, buildings, personal estate, and surrounding land could be tax exempt, so long as it was educational. The bishop looked to other secular institutions which performed similar work and did not pay a property tax. The Providence Diocese Attorney had remarked that persuading women to work for their living was undoubtedly educational, and so the Good Shepherd sisters should have a great case against the tax assessors. The young girls, kept as inmates, were educated in a wing of the Providence House which resembled an industrial school. Their primary lessons were in laundry, sewing, and embroidery, not reading and math. And the older women, incidentally, were educated in the same way. The House of the Good Shepherd was able to incorporate and gain tax-exempt status in 1905. Bishop Harkins would still regularly inquire about receiving appropriations from the state. He lamented that though the house did receive payment for a number of their inmates, they're still dependent on the goodwill of the probation officer. It was an expressed wish that the Rhode Island adopt a law that would allow children to be directly committed to the Providence House by a judge instead of the probation officer, who was a creature of some political party. This likely meant that she was a Protestant and a Republican. At the time, but still. Inmates referred by the state were often Catholic female probationers who arrived at the Providence House in increasing numbers after 1911 with the installation of a second Catholic female probation officer. According to the 1906 statute in Rhode Island state law, it was up to the discretion of probation officers to decide where their wards would go. The Providence Visitor had run a front-page article on the scant number of women sent to the Providence House in 1910. They complained that the only female probationer was deliberately overlooking the Providence House in favor of Providence Rescue Home, to which the probation officer was the superintendent and manager of. The receiving institutions for the ward's care were paid $2 a week per inmate. They were a key source of income for any reformative institution. For inmates committed by their own families, there was also a fee imposed by the sisters. The order's practical rules instructed that they should never refuse a penitent, but if their parents could not pay, they would find another way to finance that child. Families were asked to contribute on a sliding scale. The maintenance and payment was part of a contract that the parents or guardians agreed to, that the child would stay in the institution until she was a legal adult. And if they took her out early, they would also have to pay a fee. The practical rules also noted that this agreement had no weight in the law, and that they likely made them sign this contract for parents who would not know that it was not legally binding and could not pay the early release fee. They would also charge the adult women who entered the Providence House of their own accord. They agreed to stay for 2 years if they could afford it and pay lump sum for their stay, and another fee if they left early. The preferential treatment for paying inmates was inscribed in the order's practical rules. After these penitents gave oral consent to submit to the rule of the house, those who could pay would not be required to work as much and would get better meals. Community was essential for every element of the Good Shepherd Sisters' income. Beyond the laws which entitled them to payments for taking in the state's dependents, the sisters had to convince parents to turn over their children and for women to commit themselves. Their work was not a secret. It was broadly advertised in local newspapers, and the sisters relied on their established reputation when they moved from one location to another. In 1905, the Providence Visitor had announced the arrival of the Good Shepherd Sisters. Their special work was advertised for the reformation of girls and fallen women, and they concluded that the good work of the sisters in other cities is too well known to require any words of commendation. The results speak for themselves. The proof of the order's success are the Magdalens, the penitents that are so won away from a life of sin that they decide to dedicate the rest of their lives to the convent. Of course, they were kept separate from actual nuns, separate uniforms, separate housing, and additional work. The secret to their success, disclosed in this endorsement and many others, was industry. Every person in that institution worked all day long in order to keep away the devil's influence. To further prove the advantages of a Good Shepherd Sister convent, the Rhode Island cited the Boston convent as an example. The report claimed that since its inception in Boston, the order had received 6,789 young girls and women. This is by 1910. Of this, a greater number had been reclaimed to a good and useful life. 200 had died, and 386 remained in the convent as Magdalens or penitents. When the Good Shepherd Sisters were more established in Rhode Island, their work was again reported to the broader public to encourage potential donors. Fundraising was essential as well for maintaining the church's institutions. Parishioners would organize and participate in tag sales as fundraisers, and dozens of young women in Providence would volunteer to staff those fundraising committees. As the number of inmates grew over the years, the laundry expanded and more money was needed to be raised to accommodate them. In 1926, the church boasted that in 3 years, the number of women in the Providence House had doubled. That year, $15,000 had been raised in 1 week to support the Good Shepherd Sisters' work. Father Heyman, a contemporary historian in Rhode Island, also noted that additional funds were raised through fees paid by those who benefited from the institution's services. This is an allusion to the Providence House's third and most obvious source of income, the industrial laundry service. The commercial laundry would be expanded 3 times during its operation, ensuring that their machines were state-of-the-art and could compete with other industrial laundries in the area. They serviced local hotels, hospitals, and other businesses, and possibly even individual households. It's hard to tell how much money was made by these institutions because the records are not public. The looming question remains, where did all this money go when they weren't paying the workers? It can be assumed that it went directly to the Shepherd Sisters and the diocese generally, but it's impossible to guess how much money had been stolen from the women and girls who worked that laundry. The Providence House closed in 1955, marking a trend of closures throughout the United States. It's unclear why the Good Shepherd Sisters had to leave Rhode Island, though they were not happy about the news. It's likely that they were no longer profitable enough in the eyes of Bishop McVinney. There's anecdotal evidence to suggest that the advent of the laundromat and the modern washing machine had led to the most closures of the laundry. They usually shut down between 1950 and 1980 in the United States and around the world. Also, by the later half of the 20th century, less women entered these institutions, largely due to a softening social attitude towards female sexuality. The House of the Good Shepherd was sold to Providence College, an important purchase for the all-male institution, allowing it to expand rapidly and become a competitive private third-level school. For the Good Shepherd Sisters, however, it meant their work in Rhode Island would soon be forgotten, along with the inmates who resided there. The Good Shepherd Sisters take a 4th vow, in addition to chastity, poverty, and obedience. Their additional vow is the essence of their vocation, the reformation of girls and fallen women. What we know about Magdalen laundries in general is that such reformation methods can range from harsh manual labor to beatings, humiliation, and even further sexual assault. It's time for us to face this dark history. Rhode Island was home to a Magdalen laundry for 50 years. Women were kept as penitents, young girls were committed for the preservation class. For half a century, forced labor at the hands of Catholic nuns is how we punished women for having sex outside of marriage, and how we saved young girls from following in their sinful predecessors' footsteps. This is how Rhode Island courts dealt with female probationers instead of sending them to more expensive state-run institutions. The women committed to the Providence House were sent away from society because they were inconvenient. They were accepted by the sisters because they were profitable. And now they are hidden and forgotten. On this Labor Day, I want to remember these hidden workers who did not get a parade or to celebrate their work. We often say there is dignity in labor, and that's why we celebrate. But we also have to commemorate those who endured undignified forced labor. They're part of our history too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Autumn. As I bring Mary Lee back up to close this event with a couple of songs, a couple of quick thank yous. Thank you to Paul Hubbard for being here to tape our event and tape it today. Thanks to Alvin and Joe and Wayne and IBW folks for the logistics here today. And thanks to Jimmy Riley for the coffee and donuts. Jimmy says he cannot eat another donut, so grab one on your way out.
Have one next week.
Mary Lee, come on up, and Mary Lee is going to close this this morning's event with a couple of songs. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
That's good. Thank you. What an inspirational and profoundly powerful history shared with us today. Thank you so much. And in the spirit of the girls and women of the Good Shepherd, please do join me. Down in my heart, I do believe overcome someday. We will organize And now, the anthem. Are you ready? When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? The union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. Is there aught we hold in common with the greedy parasite who would lash us into serfdom, who would crush us with his might? Is there anything left to us but to organize and fight? The union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. It is we who plowed the prairies, built the cities where they trade, dug the mines and built the workshops, endless miles of railroad laid. We stand outcast and starving, it's the wonders we have made. The union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. All the world that's owned by idle drones is ours and ours alone. We have laid the wide foundations, built it skyward stone by stone. It is ours not to slave in, but to cherish for our own. The union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. They have taken untold millions that they never toiled to earn, but without our brain and muscle not a single wheel can turn. We can break their haunting power, gain our freedom when we learn. The union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. In our hands is placed a power greater than their hoarded gold, greater than the might of armies magnified 1,000-fold. We can bring to birth a new world from the ashes of the old. The union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. Thank you kindly. Many blessings on all of you this Labor Day.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Labor Vision. We appreciate your input and encourage your comments. Labor Vision can be seen on this channel 3 times each week: Tuesday at 7 p.m., Thursday at 8 p.m., and Saturday at 5 p.m.